so many people from so many different places. In many cases, they didn't even speak the same language, but they understood something that you heard frequently from the mouths of our founders. And that was a concept called the common good. Not what's good for this group versus this group, but what's good for all of us. It's a concept that's so important, one that we need to bring back. It was a concept that Charlie Kirk really felt strongly about. We had many conversations about that. And just logic and common sense in terms of how you build cohesiveness and togetherness to make a society really work. It's one of the things that we're about at the American Cornerstone Institute. I was actually planning to retire after my stint as housing secretary, but it wasn't too many weeks after the 2020 election, seeing which way the country was going, that I said, I can't enjoy myself cruising around the world and playing golf and watching my country go on the tubes. So myself and some other very talented people from HUD got together and created the American Cornerstone Institute, which looks at the fundamental pillars of success that built our country. Number one being our faith, our Judeo-Christian values, which teach us to love your neighbor. Not to hate your neighbor, not to cancel your neighbor if they have a different opinion, but to love your neighbor. Next pillar, freedom, liberty. You can do what you want to do, you can live the life you want to live as long as you're not infringing upon the rights of others in the process. Very important ingredient for harmony in society. The third pillar being community. A sense of community. Working together. You know, in the early days, if it was harvest time and Mr. Johnson fell out of a tree and broke his leg, everybody else harvested his crops. They didn't ask any questions. They didn't ask what his religion was or what his political affiliation was. They just knew he was their neighbor and he needed help. That's what we need to be thinking about once again. Now, the difference between communism and capitalism is with communism, the government controls and owns everything. And they make a lot of promises, but everything always ends up the same way. The vast majority of people living in poverty and being totally controlled, with a few at the top living luxurious lives. Capitalism, on the other hand, has created much more freedom and much more prosperity than any other system. However, the problem with capitalism, and it's something that I think each of us can control in our own sphere of influence, is sometimes people become greedy and they don't care necessarily about the other people around them. If you read carefully the Bible, there are so many passages and verses about the importance of paying attention to the poor. And there was a time in our country, before the government got so big and invasive, that the local churches and neighborhood organizations took care of their own. And they did a much better job of it, quite frankly. When I was the HUD secretary, we started a program called the Mustard Seed Program, in which we would look at those churches and community organizations that were doing a good job with the homeless. And instead of making them jump through 100 hoops and go through all kinds of federal regulations, we just supported what they were doing financially. And they were able to do it much better and to a greater extent. There are ways that the government can work with the people, with the communities, and it works successfully. There are ways for each of us in our own sphere of influence to do good and still to prosper. And we have a system that is perfectly set up to do that. We just have to have the will to do what needs to be done. But all of that requires courage. And that's what a lot of people don't have. When I was running for president, one of the things that really impressed me, I traveled around the country to the smallest little hamlets, Alabama, to the largest cities, is that most people have common sense. But I also discovered that most people do not have courage. They would rather stand in the corner and stare at the floor than to speak up about what they believe. That has to change, because you cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. One of the things that gives you that courage is our faith, our relationship with God. A lot of people wonder, how did you get involved in doing so many difficult operations? Other people said, Carson's a hot dog, can't operate on anything. Not true. Not true at all. But my faith provided a lot of my courage. I remember there was one case, a young man developed a brainstem tumor. He had Hippolyndau disease, where you develop these vascular tumors in the brain. He developed one in his palms, right in the brainstem. None of the adult neurosurgeons would touch him with a 10-foot pole. That's considered inoperable. Unfortunately for me, his wife was a pediatric neurosurgery nurse who worked on the floor where most of my patients were. And she said, "You're going to have to operate on my husband." And I said, "But I'm a pediatric nurse." And she said, "Well, he acts like a child." And she just kept after me until I finally agreed to go talk to him. And I said, "Craig, there's a reason that no one wants to operate in it." I said, "If I were to take you to the operating room, there's at least a 50-50 chance that you will die on the table." And he said, "Doc, if you don't take me, there's a 100% chance I'm going to die. I'll take 50-50 any day." Took him to the operating room. It was a very difficult operation. New blood vessels had grown into the area. But I was able, on the high-power microscope, to clear a little area on the pons and make a very small incision. You couldn't see down inside. You can't make that big an incision because the brainstem is like a coaxial cable. There's nothing in there that's not doing something. And I took a little microprobe, felt in the direction that I thought the tumor was, and felt a little bounce there. So I knew that was the capsule. And I grabbed it with a little micro forceps. You couldn't see it, you had to do it all by feel. And I started delivering it, pushing the tissue away and pulling it. And then the anesthesiologist gleefully announced, "The evoked potentials have gone flat, you killed him. I told you were going to kill him." He was very much against the operation. And the atmosphere was very solemn at that point. Closed him up. Of course, he didn't have any brainstem function at the end of the operation, so he went to the intensive care unit on full life support. And I prayed earnestly with his wife, and I went home. When I came back the next morning, he was sitting up in the bed, had been extubated, and was telling jokes. And I say that to say that the Lord blessed me with a lot of surgical skills, but I knew very well that it wasn't me, it was him. And that's what led me through a lot of the very difficult and unusual operative situations I found myself in. And God has been a huge part of the development of this nation and our relationship with this nation has been a huge part of it. And that's why we excel far beyond anybody else. But as we've allowed some of those values and principles to lead us, look where we have gotten. But it's reversible. And it's something that I think we all can be a part of. But it does require that courage, that relationship. And I want you to think about this. Think about all the people who preceded us and some of the sacrifices that they made for us. Think about their faith. Think about their courage. Think about World War II and all the young women who went into the munitions factories and were blown to bits. Were they frightened? Of course they were. Did they stop? No, they did not. They built more airplanes, tanks, and motors than anybody could imagine. Think about the young men, 15, 16, 17, who lied about their age so that they could fight for our country. Think about D-Day as they approached the shores of Normandy under heavy machine gun fire. Hundreds laying dead in the sand. Thousands laying dead in the sand. Were the others afraid? Did they turn back? Yes, they were afraid. No, they didn't turn back. They stepped over the dead bodies, and they overwhelmed the Axis forces, knowing in many cases that they would never see their loved ones or their homeland again. Why? Why did they do that? Obviously not for themselves. They did it for you and for me, so that we could live in peace and freedom. And now, ladies and gentlemen, like Charlie Kirk, it's our turn to do it for those who are coming after us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carson. Very awesome words. A few questions. So I think you mentioned it a little bit, but in the past years, you've moved between medicine, public service, and political commentary. How do you decide which roles to take on? How should students decide when to focus on activism versus professional specialization?
Well, wisdom. I always ask God to give me wisdom. And then you listen. And sometimes that wisdom comes from somebody who's sitting right there next to you, or a family member, or a roommate. You just have to be open to what's good. And also look at the direction of your life and look at what are your talents. What are you good at? You know, in this room, every single person in this room is better at something than everybody else in the room. If you can get in contact with that thing that you're really good at and follow that, it makes all the difference in the world.
Thank you. Second question. In a culture and society where nowadays the political climate has become so polarized to the point of violence, why should we engage with political opponents?
It's important to recognize that those people who are your political opponents maybe really aren't your political opponents. And to make it your goal to help them to realize that it's okay to disagree with people. It doesn't make you to the enemy. It's those who are manipulating us to make us think that we have become enemies. And this is going to be one of the greatest tests that our nation has ever gone through. We've gone through some very difficult situations, and we've come out victorious. But this is